Hey, what's going on? Steve Peterson of Infinity Investments. And recently I did a video on 1031 exchange success. And I got a lot of questions about some of the rules about 1031 exchanges. And there's a lot of them, but today I'm going to talk about the top 5 rules you need to know when conducting a 1031 tax deferred exchange. Now, number one, before I get into rules, is you need to be working with qualified experts on this, from your real estate broker to your mortgage broker to the qualified intermediary, which is the company that handles the exchange, to the title company. If you have an attorney, a tax, a CPA who knows about this stuff, because it's a complicated transaction. You can do it, it can be done efficiently, but you need to have a team of experts working with you. That being said, there's some things that you really need to know when you're conducting this 1031 exchange. Number one, okay, let's talk about engaging the qualified intermediary. In the business, we call it the QI. And you need to engage the QI before the close of escrow. Rule number one, engage the QI before you close. Because what happens is, say you close escrow and they send you or your client the money, you are now what's called in constructive receipt of the funds, meaning that you can't exchange. You are paying capital gains taxes. State of California, that means you're paying the feds and you're paying the great old Golden State. You don't want to do that, especially if you were trying to do the exchange. Seems real simple. Unfortunately, people have bumped their heads up against the wall in the wrong way in this one. So what you want to do is you want to engage the QI before close, at least a day before close. Now, I highly recommend that you do this as soon as you open up escrow on the down leg property, the property that you're selling. Go ahead and engage the qualified intermediary, because you don't want any surprises. They've got a set of exchange documents that they need the seller to sign. Let's minimize our chaos at the end of a closing. As you know, real estate brokers, agents, investors, principals, you know at the end of a closing, it can get tedious and crazy. So let's minimize on that by engaging the QI up front. That way, if there's anything that you need to ask or you need to address during the escrow, you're not waiting at the end and getting some, getting some information and having to scramble. This is not a scramble drill. Unfortunately, it ends up being like that a lot of times, but we want to take our diligent steps towards making sure that this transaction goes as smooth as possible. So you want to engage the QI before the close of escrow, okay? And the qualified intermediary is very much like an escrow company, if you will, for the exchange. They're a neutral third party who's going to receive the money from escrow when the property is sold, follow all the rules, make sure you're in compliance, and then they're going to disperse the money when you go buy your replacement property, okay? Very, very important that you choose the right QI, okay? I work a lot with IPX 1031 Exchange. I've also worked with Chicago Deferred Exchange. There's a lot of different companies, a Rexco Exchange, but you want to make sure that this company is properly licensed and bonded and funded, because back in the Great Recession, there were a lot of companies popping up, this lawyer, mom and pop fund companies doing stuff, and they would, get the money, and unfortunately, a couple of them got the money and they ran off, and then their clients were stuck on the hook without any money and then owing taxes. You got to make sure you're dealing with a reputable firm, one that's licensed, bonded, and they're well capitalized, and you don't have to worry about them going bankrupt either. Very important. So engage the QI, the right QI, before the close of escrow. That's number one. Number two, okay, the identification and closing deadline requirements. This is the most stressful piece, I believe, in my opinion, of the business, of the exchange process, okay? Because from the date escrow closes, you've got 45 calendar days, not 45 business days. It's another big mistake. And I just had someone call me yesterday, hey, we got 60 days, right? No, you don't got 60 days. You got 45 days. And that includes Christmas, Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, 4th of July, all of that. Now, I will say, during COVID, there was an extension made. And I made a video with Ron Ricard of IPX 1031, because when COVID first hit, and on April, there was an extension of the 45 days and to identify your property. Okay, but let's just pretend like that, because right now that extension is not in action. We're back to the 45 days to identify. And what identify means is that you have to fill out the exchange documents identifying the address and the purchase price of the property that you're going to be acquiring, okay? So you got 45 days from the close of escrow to go ahead and do that. And then you have 180 days, important, from the close of escrow to close of your down leg property, the property you sold. So close of escrow on the down leg property, 180 days later, you have to have closed the replacement property, okay? That's not 180 days at the end of 45 days. That 45-day identification period is within the 180 days. A lot of people get this one wrong because it's not 45 plus 180. It's 45 within the 180. And again, that 180, calendar days, not business days, okay? And holidays don't count, all right? Now, let me just talk a little bit about the identification process because there's a couple of different ways you can identify. The most common way to identify, one we recommend, is the 3 property rule. So you have to identify up to 3 properties. You write them on a piece of paper, submit them to the qualified intermediary. However, there's another rule that's a little bit more complicated called the 200% rule, which means this: you can identify 100 properties if you want, an unlimited amount of properties, so long as the total aggregate value of all those properties that you identify does not exceed 200% of the value of the down leg property. So in other words, you sell a property for $1 million, right? You can identify however many properties you want to identify, as long as the aggregate value, the total value of all the properties you identify, does not exceed $2 million. Okay, 200% rule. Very, very important. Okay, I suggest you try to stick with the 3 property rule because it's a lot more straightforward. And we want to try to simplify this process as much as we possibly can because there's a lot of moving parts, okay? So that's just some clarity within that. 45 days from the close of escrow to identify, 180 days from the close of escrow to close on the new properties, on the replacement properties, okay? Calendar days, not business days, holidays don't count. Got it? All right, rule number 3. All right, now this is very, very important because you need to be able to spend the cash and replace the debt. Okay, here's what I mean by that. So let's say you sold a property at $1 million, all right? And let's just say the property that you sold had a $600,000 loan against it. So you sold at $1 million and you got $400,000. That's probably going to be a blend of your gain and your original investment. And by the way, just so you know, not to get into tax stuff, but when you pay capital gains, it's based on the gain, okay? What you profited, okay? Not necessarily your initial investment. So your initial investment goes in what's called your basis, and when you're taxed on the gain, all right? However, when you're exchanging, you need to invest all of that cash into the next one and into what's called the replacement property. Any cash that you do not invest, even if it was a part of the original investment, is what's called boot. And boot is the amount of money that you need to pay taxes on. Now, some of you guys say, hey, I want to do this exchange, I want to reinvest, I want to buy another property, but I need to put like 50 grand in my pocket just because, I need to put some money in my pocket, right? You can do that, but just understand, if you were to do that, you're going to pay taxes on that amount because it's boot, okay? And that might be cool because you might need to put some cash in your pocket, right? But if you're not trying to pay any boot, you need to be aware that you need to spend all of that cash, okay? And here's the next thing is, you need to replace all of that debt. Meaning that if you had $600,000 of debt on your down leg property, you need to at least have $600,000 of debt on the new up leg property or properties. And that can, again, it can be spread out over 3 properties if you do the 3 property rule, or however many properties if you do the 200% rule. But when you complete the exchange, you have to at least carry the amount of debt you had in the property, the down leg, the property you sold, to the replacement properties. Very, very important. A lot of people think, hey, we're going to sell this property and just, I don't want any debt anymore. I just want to take my cash and buy something for cash. Well, let's just say you did that and you had $1 million, you took $400,000, you bought $400,000 for cash. You're going to pay taxes on $600,000 of boot, as if you put $600,000 in your pocket. That's even worse, so you have to understand this. Here's the simple way to think about it. Spend the cash, replace the debt. Spend the cash, replace the debt. You ain't got to worry about it. You're good, okay? Now, rule number four. You have to exchange in what's called a like-kind property. And here's what that means. It has to be deed for deed, right? It doesn't mean if you sell an apartment building that you have to buy an office building. It doesn't mean that if you sell an apartment building, you have to buy another apartment building. You can sell your apartment building and buy an office building or vacant land or retail building or an industrial property, whatever. It just has to, follow the other rules that we talked about. But the like kind means deed for deed, okay? It has to be deed for deed. When you sell out of a property, then you have to come back into the other, deed. It can't be an LLC interest, okay? It can't be stocks in a real estate company, okay? It can't be a business. It has to be a deed. You sold the deed, you have to go into a deed, all right? Now, what you can do is invest into like a group investment, like a tenant in common or a Delaware statutory trust where there's other investors. But in doing so, you've got to make sure, that the allocations of how much you invest into that property fit within, the numbers of spending the cash and replacing the debt. Okay, a little bit more complicated when you invest coming out of exchange into a group investment. You can do it, but you have to understand that, it has to be deed for deed. You can't sell your property and then go into an LLC interest. You have to have a deeded percent of that property, like you would have in a tenants in common or you would have in a Delaware statutory trust. Very, 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 very important on that, okay? Critical, because I get this question from investors all the time, and there's one coming up and they were selling apartments and like, well, I just want to, I was thinking about buying this land and doing this stuff, but I know I have to stay like kind. And I told him, I said, no, you could actually do that if the numbers make sense, because you don't have to sell apartments and buy another apartment, okay? Very, very important. Now, rule number 5, and something I think that you guys need to think about and figure out if you're investing into partnerships, okay? And let's say you guys have multiple partners into a deal, and then multiple partners are going to sell, but the partners are not going to stay together, okay? In general, if you have multiple partners and you guys sell in the LLC, you guys all need to then stay together and buy the other property in the LLC, all things considered, okay? What you're not able to do is sell, everybody go their separate ways and then exchange, okay? You're not able to do that technically. Now you might be able to structure the LLC before you sell and everything. There's some LLC things you can do to kind of make sure that happens. But from a general standpoint, if you're selling out of a partnership or a group investing, the group needs to stay together to go buy something else in order to conduct an exchange. There's other ways if you're selling out a group and you want to split from the group. There's other ways to defer taxes through qualified opportunity zones, charitable remainder trusts, possibly DSTs. But if you're trying to sell and everybody goes their separate way and you individually want to go and buy another property in an exchange, you're not able to do it. Now, there are some things you might not talk to your lawyer, talk to your attorney, your accountant. You might be able to do if you guys are saying, hey, we want to sell, but we don't want to, stay together. What can we do to make sure that one of the partners can do an exchange, okay? But the general piece of it is if you guys are selling as a partnership or a group investing, and you want to do an exchange, you have to stay together, okay? And if not, then you really need to pre-plan before you sell and figure out how you're going to do a deal, and in the context of a 1031 exchange. Now, as I wrap this up, I always like to say, the reason we do an exchange is to buy a better asset, not to defer capital gains taxes, okay? You don't want to just do an exchange to defer the taxes and buy a worse asset. That's a bad move. You want to make sure in doing this that you're going from one asset to a better asset, or one situation to a better situation. Let the economics drive the deal, and let the icing on the cake be the deferral of capital gains. I hope this was helpful. Like, subscribe, share this with friends, stay engaged, and I'm going to do another video on 1031 exchanges because I really see there's a lot of gray zones. And as we navigate, especially out of this pandemic, and a lot of people are doing exchanges, we need to be really clear and succinct on what we're doing, how we're doing it, and who we're doing it with. I look forward to seeing y'all in the next video. Have a great day.